Oh, that last one was long, wasn't it? I'll try to make the future ones less long, but I can't promise. This video will be pretty long, but the written module is much shorter. So we're going to take you through the process of looking at a funding opportunity. And I think this one is one you'll be interested in. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program. The text of the module will explain how you should think about marking up your solicitation printouts, but let me go ahead and start. I don't have a pen, so I'm going to mark areas of general interest in yellow. The first thing we come to is the list of which directorates participate in this program. Remember in the last module you looked at the NSF About NSF website and saw all the links to the directorates and the divisions? That's what this is talking about. You can see there's a wide range of participants here, so there's something for everyone. I'll mark compliance issues in blue. The due dates for this are automated and they're not negotiable. You have to comply with them. The system will seriously not allow you to submit even a second after the due date time. So make sure you knew when the application to your relevant unit is due if you apply. I'll mark strategic priorities in green. Now this might look like political fluff to you, but it's an important statement of strategy. When you write, you want to address how you fulfill this core purpose of the program. Always look for your purpose of your program and make sure that you address it. So you want to say something about the vitality of the U.S. workforce and how you contribute to it. You also want to talk about diversity, which could be addressed not just with race and gender and disability, but also with socioeconomic status or geography issues like rural development or diverse perspectives like a different undergraduate or work experience, and so on. So if the phrases vitality of the U.S. scientific workforce and diversity of the scientific workforce, or engineering if that's for you, if those phrases do not appear in your application, then you're doing it wrong. This is a surprisingly important statement, this purpose statement. Also here for compliance, I've marked the research-based master's and doctoral degrees in science and engineering line. You might think that I'm marking that because it's science and engineering, and that is part of it. But if you looked at the directorates, you'll have noticed that the social, economic, and behavioral sciences are included as well. So it might not be exactly what you expect when you think of science and engineering. My big concern here is the research-based degree program. So before a PSM master's student submits, you'd want to check to make sure that PSM programs are included, or if it's only MS programs. So we'll watch for details of that over the course of the solicitation. You might even want to check with a contact or program officer. We'll talk in a future module about approaching the program officers and other contact points to talk about a solicitation. And you can see that some of these are listed below this. Now you might consider the section on the money that comes next the most important. And it probably is for you, but it's a lot less so for our grant writing concerns. In terms of grant writing, just check that it's enough for your needs and your budget. Another compliance item: who submits and how? You need to add that to your compliance checklist that you should be making. This has to be submitted by the student through the FastLane system, the NSF FastLane system, here. You'd want to make a note of that on a sticky note. Now I'm skipping the parts about current enrollment because you're all UNC enrollees, so that's covered already. Notice that you can only apply to one. So even if you're doing bioengineering, you can't apply to biology and engineering. There's a list at the bottom that says which primary area to use for bioengineering. We'll talk more about these budgetary terms in a future module, but you can see here that you cannot apply to include cost shares or indirect costs. So when you fill out your campus grant information, and yes, you can't just apply to a sponsor on your own, you also have to go through your campus. When you see these terms, you'll know that there's 0 cost share and 0 indirect allowed. I marked some structural elements as not applicable I'm not going to go over those because you don't have to use them. And we see the due dates are repeated, even though we've already seen those. There's a lot of repetition in these solicitations sometimes. Then, the NSF usually uses two review guidelines. One is intellectual merit, and one is broader impacts. This says that those normal review standards will apply. There are a lot of great webinars on what those terms mean in the NSF website, and the grant proposal guide that you saw linked in the last module talks about them extensively. So this is a general point to keep an eye on. I marked it as strategic, but it's also structural in a lot of ways. I'll mark with those when more detail comes in the solicitation later. And we're finally to the actual contents. I hope by now you've seen that this reading process isn't something to be rushed. That's why it might be an area that you can offer real assistance with in your post-PSM career. The lead researcher may only have time to skim it, but you, going through with a critical eye to analyze the solicitation, can be a real help on the team. You'll notice that Section 5, Subsection A, will be the proposal preparation instructions, and you can guess that that will be full of compliance points, as you'll see when we get there. Okay, here's some more strategic phrases you want to address. Demonstrated potential for significant achievements. Don't get fancy in writing. Match their phrases so your responses are easy to spot. So somewhere there should be a sentence or paragraph that says something like, I have the demonstrated potential for significant achievements in science based on my, and then go on with some successes or some work experience or history or resume highlights or maybe discussion of how you're in a cutting-edge program or whatever you think might be worth showcasing here. You see that same phrase again here with the program goals. And then, goal 2, broaden participation of underrepresented groups. Make sure you include that in your phrases, even if you don't feel you can address it well. It's a strategic priority, so it should be listed. You mark it regardless of whether you feel you're part of an underrepresented group. We'll talk more in the next module about some ways you might discuss your underrepresentation, even if you're not in one of the listed groups. But if you are in one or more of the listed groups here, circle or make a note so you know which one or ones you plan to write in. Then we have a third issue here, the role of this fellowship as a critical part of the NSF strategy to build a globally engaged U.S. workforce that can advance national research and innovation. Again, put this down as a strategic element and consider its sentence phrasing that you can use in your application, your future global engagement, your future leadership in advancing innovation. Those should get mentioned in your application. Scrolling down, there are some general pieces of what to keep in mind. You have to demonstrate a bachelor's degree and be prepared to certify your eligibility. You should probably make a checklist system specifically for post-award compliance issues like this, so that you don't need to do them in your application, but you are prepared for when you get accepted. As we'll see later, you can get accepted and then lose the fellowship if you don't comply with the post-award stuff too. I put a green bit here. But this is a less important strategic element. If you have a way to address this globally engaged, collaborative relationships that we read about before, you can get funding to make international collaborations. So you have ways you can improve your engagement with their programs and your ability to address their priorities. They talk about what program that is and what their interest is in doing it. So if you want to write about this GROW initiative in your main application, you should add something about how it adds to your ability to collaborate successfully in international teams. Here's an important one, and notice how it's kind of in the middle of this section and doesn't stand out as much as earlier important ones. If you wondered why we're combing through this document with sentence-by-sentence detail, this is a good example. The strategic bit is that the plan outline should be comprehensive, holistic, and with individual interests and competencies addressed. Professional researcher interests and competencies, but also maybe a titch of personal ones, should be included, if you can make them fit in time and also stand out. That's what the holistic part means. But then comes a structural bit. You must provide a detailed profile on experiences and plans. Add that to your list of structural elements in your preliminary outline. With it, add a note that says what needs to be demonstrated in that section. Potential for significant achievements. Scrolling down, on page 6, we see that there are added opportunities and notes to consider. Fellows get additional resources. Adding how those resources will affect your career plans shows that you are responding to the opportunities and that they will be of benefit to you. That responsiveness is very valuable. Here we see again that the submission must be on the fast lane system. Grant solicitations often repeat compliance points several times. They want to be sure that there is no way that the points can be missed. The eligibility information that comes after gives you the idea of who can apply and who can't. It's unfortunate, but there are specific eligibility requirements in terms of citizenship, degree, and area of study. You must include certification of your eligibility. They include some good clarifications of the issues so you can be sure that you're right when you self-certify. But of course, if there's any uncertainty, that's what the contacts and program officers are for. You can always send a polite, quick email to ask them for clarification. At the bottom of page 7, make sure that you notice the exact amount of enrollment time you can have already completed. And at the bottom of page 8 and top of page 9, here's an in-depth set of descriptions of the allowable and unallowable fields of study. As we move on, they remind us that the deadlines are set according to the individual field of study, which branch you apply to. And you see this phrase, returned without review, here. Anytime you see that, it means that if you don't follow those compliance rules they're talking about, then the application will be sent back without anyone even looking at it more. So obviously that's really important. That's why we're trying to avoid any problems by building a compliance checklist. Also here in orange is marked a list of documents and sections that you will be working on. Notice the flow of things. We had a couple of explanatory sections that were only important to a few people, and then all of a sudden there is a flurry of really important information. Because of this flow, it doesn't do to read inattentively even when a long section is irrelevant to you, because it may be followed by a critical piece of information. So anyway, collect this list of sections for your outlining effort. The particular statements you should include will be critical to efficiently organizing your writing. Notice that they remind you to include all of the required documents and only the required documents. Then, for your compliance checklist, we have the formatting information. Decide whether you plan to use a Word document or a LaTeX or LaTeX document. If you plan to use complex equations and are proficient in LaTeX, it is the better choice. But if you don't need the equations, then Word might be easier for you to show to people that you will ask to look over and give advice on your grant. And this part at the top I've marked in orange as notes to your outlining sections. These are absolute page limits. It's not like a class where a professor might not care if you run a few lines over. Make sure you watch for these page limits strictly. So add these lengths to your outline in your structure notes. Then we get back to the reminders about how to upload the transcripts and some notes about what kinds to use depending on your timing in your program. Leaving off a section is as invalid as going over by a page. Then they make it clear here about letters of reference. These are supposed to be letters of scholarly support, not from relatives or family members, but by faculty or research supervisors or other correspondents in your research field. You can request up to 5 to get the 3 you need. The point of highlighting this, or in your case underline, is to have places you remember to check as you're going through trying to answer your questions. So if you come back wondering about something, all the answers are marked, so you don't have to read through the details in all of them. So yeah, more of the useful details. Now about the references. Likewise, information here if you're in an interdisciplinary field. They talk about choosing a primary field to submit under. They've made the issue of submitting under a specific topic clear multiple times, so you can guess that this is probably an area that they've had trouble with. Applicants probably regularly missubmit in the wrong topic, so they've added more guidelines about choosing the right topic to submit through. Okay. This section on review and the review process is very important. It's your first chance to really understand the program's review and merit process. This can become familiar as you get used to a certain agency or sponsor because they tend to have some commonalities. If you work regularly with a certain agency, then you usually get familiar with their review criteria and see them repeatedly. But there can be variations, so be sure to look at this each time. The statements on broader impacts and intellectual merit are common criteria in all of the NSF programs. Other agencies also have agency-wide review guidelines. These are things that you should plan to get a good understanding of because they will affect all of your applications with that agency, now and in the future. There are often documents and videos just on those review priorities and processes. Add these to your list of sections and structural elements, and add comment notes to describe what each section should mean. There's a lot of strategic material here too. Remember that those go in their own list, and the phrasing of these strategic elements we're collecting here is important. Keep an eye out for phrasings that you can use in your writing responses to the strategic elements. For example, they say that reviewers consider how proposals know they will succeed, whether the project is successful. So plan to say, I know that I will be successful because ... in your response sentence. Likewise, you see here, what is the potential to advance knowledge and understanding in its field? So your strategic notes should reflect that, and then your response plan should say, my fellowship will advance knowledge and understanding in the field by, and then discuss the benefits of your studies to the field. Paralleling their language is important. That's part of why we're highlighting and collecting so many strategic items, so you can know what words and phrases are needed. And notice that it says, for intellectual merit and for broader impacts, each of these two needs to address its potentials, a transformativeness, planning and evaluation, qualifications, and resources. So there are 2 sections with 5 subsections for both criteria, 5 sub-items in each. And they give some clarification that there are a variety of ways the broader impacts can be met, either directly or indirectly. So you can adjust your study plans to help include some broader impacts benefits. And now, here on page 13, They include notes on the general review criteria and their interaction specifically with the GRFP, so you can use those to clarify how to address the strategic statements you need in response to the review criteria. Then it clarifies this by saying that the review takes the issues holistically and the issue of demonstrated potential. Then, holistically and potential. We see here on 14 that there's a compliance requirement for accepting or declining by a certain date. So that's good to keep track of. And then the added resources. We mentioned before that if there's a need for these materials, it's worthwhile to describe how you will use them. Cyber infrastructure, adaptive technologies, and international research support are all available. Take advantage of these and describe how you will take advantage in your application if possible. More compliance here. You already know you have to do a formal acceptance letter, but it's phrased a little bit differently here. Sometimes they switch it up like that. And here's an interesting thing that applies to most applications. Major changes in scope must be approved. This is true in basically every program. Keep in mind that this is a grant, not a gift. So the program officer will keep in contact with you, and you will submit reports throughout the post-award period after a grant is received. So big changes from the proposal must be discussed before they can be changed. Then also we find there is no double support, which is not a reason to restrict your applications. You are certainly free to apply to 2 different government fellowships, but you should note to yourself that if you receive more than one, you have to limit the acceptances to 1. If life balance is an issue, here's another associated program worth being aware of. You would stick a sticky note on this if you were doing it by hand. You can get child or elder care release. And moving along, we see that you have to state your responsible conduct of research training and compliance. I've added a compliance point here that if you are doing international work, you should go ahead and mention in the application that the organization you plan to work with has their responsible conduct of research, or RCR, in place. That will show that you're thinking about it and have chosen a good place to partner. I've also highlighted that you must get RCR training. If you have that already, go ahead and put it in so you can show your compliance is already strong. But if not, no big, but you will have to do that after everything is in proper order. The next 2 structural notes I'm showing is that you need to include a section on your RCR items if they're relevant to your work, if you're working with humans or animals. Please keep in mind that this includes surveys and user testing and so on, so even if you're researching devices, if there will be research with humans at the end for assessing implementation, then you'll need a section on how you plan to protect their rights and be ethical. Likewise, anything having to do with animal models of biological or chemical systems, but hopefully if you do that kind of work, you already know that you need a plan to keep that ethical. In any case, if these kinds of protections are relevant, you should talk about how you plan to include ethics in your career development. There are specific bodies, the IRB and the IACUC for animals, IRB for humans, on your campus that will help you with these things. If you search responsible conduct of research on your campus website, you'll probably find all the relevant information. Now, here at the bottom of page 15 is an item, and I was debating if this should be structural or strategic or compliance. Sometimes it's not entirely sure. In a sense, it's a compliance issue to add to your checklist, and you can see I made the actual statement here blue for that reason. You should add it to your post-award part of the compliance checklist. You'll have to use this disclaimer if you give conference presentations or if you publish findings or anything else based on funding from the fellowship. But I also made it structural here because you should have some sort of a dissemination plan included in some way. Remember that they want to know that you are developing towards an impactful career, and in the sciences and technology, that includes presenting at conferences and possibly publishing, although at the master's level that can be harder. But you can do it! I have confidence in you! But how easy it would be depends on your research situation. If you're interning in industry, there may be some confidentiality issues, of course, but so you should be planning on some form of professional presentations in your field to disseminate what you find and also to get your name out there. So include that in your professional plan. Either add this as a structural subsection in some larger discussion, or else if you think you'll get enough dissemination of your work done, then make its own section within either the future goals or the graduate research plan. We're down to the post-award compliance stuff, and that's good. That means we're getting close to done. In your compliance checklist, make sure some of these things for post-award or after you get the grant are listed. A lot of people minimize the importance of these things because they're focused on the money now, but if you don't follow the post-award compliance, they can take the award away. So make sure you track it all, and when you get an award, stick all of the post-award stuff in your calendar to remind yourself on time. Here you see that includes an annual report you do. Plus, there's an annual certification of status and intent to continue. They'll send you reminders and forms, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep track of these things yourself, too. And some general notes I wanted to bring your attention to here. Governmental things are public record. That means that your participation in the program is public record. That's generally good because you want people to know when you get a prestigious award, but it's something you want to be aware of. And then you may get a survey to help get feedback on the program, which is your chance to have influence for your future years in the program and also to improve things for your junior colleagues that are coming in the future. I didn't mark the contacts, but they're here if you have questions. There's a future module about making contact with contacts. In research funding applications, that's very important, much more critical than it is in fellowship funding applications. You saw how they give out hundreds of these a year, so the connection is not as close as in programs that manage maybe 4 new projects or 10 new projects a year. Some general things relating to the NSF bring the solicitation to a close. The strategic highlight here, wherever you see the purpose of something, there's a good chance it's strategic, so watch for that cue. In this case, it's the NSF's purpose, but this is a phrasing that you might want to use to make good use of words from. You could have a nice sentence at the start that says, "The NSF's support of my education will advance national health by supporting my research, which will add to the progress of science in oncogenes." Or, "The NSF's support of my education will advance national prosperity by supporting my research, which will add to technological progress and innovation in heuristics." So, those are valuable phrases that you can take and add to. A general note to give you a sense of why grants need careful attention. See here, it says 1/5 of proposals are funded. 1/5. That means that every one that gets money, on average, 4 do not. Now, that's obviously going to vary a lot across the solicitations, but if you ever think you can just write off a quick application in a day or two, please give this 1/5 some more serious thought. Another possible phrasing, similar to the one we just did, promote and advance scientific progress. So that's a good phrase to hang on to if you need something to say, do good things, and change it to promote and advance progress. Here on page 18, a little bit more about your privacy. I know most people won't care, but those in computer or information engineering and tech areas should care about this stuff. So I marked it in my version of your underlining, just some things to note. And our very last thing, their complete list of fields of study. You've seen several bits about submitting to the right area. So here is the master list of which fields go in which areas. Pick one and only one based on this list. Even if you're in a subfield smaller than one of these, you still apply under the umbrella subfield closest to your area. And the rest is just that list. Wow, that was a huge process to go through. But I hope it gave you some ideas about how to spot things that are important and think about what they mean. The point of this was to explain which things I would note and explain a bit of why. You should now go through a solicitation yourself and practice and mark it up. Then go back through a second time for your 3 areas: structure, compliance, and strategy. Make those 3 and take them to go make your lists. This analytical process of deconstructing is actually the intellectual core of grantsmanship. If we stopped now, you'd be ahead of your peers in terms of understanding good grant practices. Well, thanks for listening. This is Nina, signing off Module 3, analyzing the solicitation for the UNC TSM program's course on the fundamentals of grantsmanship.